Hello, it's Sarah and Mary Margaret. We're back again, and we're going to be talking about misunderstood ideas, misconceptions in instructional support. We thought we'd start this actually doing a two-part discussion. The first part is going to be sort of talking about instructional support as a whole, as a domain as a whole, and how each dimension fits in that. Mm-hmm. And Sarah's got a really nice example of some misconceptions. And then following this blog, we're going to talk a little bit more about a real-life scenario and how we can infuse indications or effective interactions around the entire instructional support domain. Instructional support, if you think about it, what it really means is how do you support, which means enable or assist or make possible children's formation of ideas, seeing how the world gets put together for them, developing big ideas, furthering that knowledge so that it becomes usable across all situations, and really helping them with language so that they can express their thinking and communicate their ideas in a way that works for them. So you want to give your examples because I really like them.
Sure. And so one of the things, thinking about concept development, so start at the beginning of instructional support, is that a lot of people truly think that if the teacher is working with kids on something that is pre-academic or something that is a concept, that it's going to be high in concept development. And that's just not necessarily the case. Yes, we always have to show the manual, but it's that footnote on in the pre-K manual on the bottom of page 62 that reminds us that concept development isn't necessarily about the development of a specific concept, but it's about what teachers are doing to push children's higher order thinking skills. So we can walk into a classroom and the teacher's talking about seasons, and it's almost winter here, right? So and they're talking about winter, and the leaves have lost all their trees, and it gets cold and things like that. But there's nothing that helps the children really understand. For example, that the Earth is rotating and it's moving away from the sun, and the days are shorter, and all of those kinds of things that are the reason why we need to
No context.
No context,
Yeah.
yes, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. So there's no context, and so children can probably spit back, oh yeah, in winter it gets cold, it gets dark, we wear our coats, we wear our hats, we wear our mittens, but no understanding of the bigger scheme of seasons.
And how that fits.
Mm-hmm.
That integration and connection.
Yeah, exactly.
Piece.
Exactly. And
yeah.
So, would we count it as concept development? We would certainly note it, but it would be a low-level concept development. And one thing that I always think about when I'm observing in a classroom is the extent to which the teacher's interactions are pushing that higher order thinking. And going back to that definition of concept development promotes the children's higher order thinking skills and cognition. And if all they're doing is rote learning of facts, then it's not true effective concept development.
Right. So when I think of concept development, and when I think of any of these dimensions, I really think about the language just at the level of the name of the dimension. Mm-hmm. And for me to wrap my head around it, I started saying, so what is a concept? And the concept is an idea, right? Mm-hmm. A big idea. And those ideas might be something big idea. They could be something that's related to like the seasons, right? Or whatever you choose, there usually some intent around that, we hope. And then development. So development for me means going from simple to complex. So we are helping the children through their natural curiosity find ways to ask the questions and figure out the world. And our job as teachers, effective teachers, is to kind of walk them through that process to figure things out. So we do that in a simple to complex way. So here we have an idea like the seasons and that things are changing, and that's what we want them to recognize, that over time, at least in Virginia, seasons change. And so questions about like, why do you think that happened? How is this season different than summer? What are some ways that we could figure out why it's different? And maybe they'd say, oh, we could look at a book, or we could do the weather chart, or so that getting the children to their natural curiosity to figure things out on their own. That the teacher guides the children to kind of explore the world, and teaches them how to explore by asking questions or getting them to brainstorm ideas or make a plan. And then when they try out their hypothesis, then they learn something from that. And then when that happens, we begin to provide feedback to deepen that, which is that quality of feedback, right? So when those ideas are hatched, I'm turning in Sarah's manual to quality of feedback, because we live and die by the manual, which is a good thing. So feedback. I'm not
dying today.
No, you're not dying. I'm living. So feedback is somebody says something or does something and something happens, or somebody says something back. And feedback is feedback. But quality of feedback is, when you think of quality, it's depth, it's meaningful, it's more than is expected. And so that feedback, if you look at the definition on page 69, is talking about information, the feedback that the teacher gives a child that expands learning, grows learning and understanding. And so that can look like taking that big idea, and maybe the child has the wrong idea or the right idea, and taking that teachable moment and providing feedback to get that child to go deeper. So what do you think is like the misunderstood part of quality feedback?
So I think probably the most misunderstood part of quality feedback really comes around feedback loops. And people will go in and they'll hear a back and forth exchange and they'll just make an automatic assumption.
Yeah, or just do like an arrow or something.
Yeah, and you know, the swirly loops that I've seen a lot of people do, which I understand exactly why they do them, but I really want to the extent I can, I really want to script out what I'm hearing so that I can then check it to make sure that it really was expanding the children's learning. So we're going to do a little role play here, because that's what we're doing this morning. Mary Margaret, what did you have for breakfast this morning?
Noosa yogurt.
Noosa yogurt. Oh, I love Noosa yogurt. It's one of my favorites.
Well, you told me all about it. That's why I had it.
Oh, okay. And what flavor did you have?
Coconut.
Coconut. Oh. Do you put fruit in it?
Nuts.
Nuts. Oh, what kind of nuts?
Almonds.
Almond coconut. Oh, that sounds really yummy. Do you usually eat yogurt for breakfast?
Every morning.
Every morning. All right. Well, thanks for sharing that with me.
You bet.
Okay. We just had a back and forth exchange. That's one of the things we're looking for in terms of a feedback loop. But I would, if you were live with us, I would probably pause and say, did Mary Margaret learn anything? No, she didn't learn anything. In fact, I learned something. I learned that she had Noosa yogurt with almonds for breakfast. And so it's a really good way, or to me, it's a good illustration to help us understand that that's not a feedback loop. Whereas I'm sure there's something that the two of us could talk about that I could further her. In fact, lots of things we can talk about, because we talk all the time, to further her knowledge. But
well, maybe something about why did you choose Noosa? What other things could you put in the Noosa? Right. So how do you think they make yogurt? Yeah. Why is that different than other yogurts or something?
Why do you
which would be something that thought process, right? Or getting me to explain what so I know that Noosa is good and it's good for me, but how do we take that further?
Right. And if you said, I know it's good for me, I would say, well, why is it good for you? And then Mary Margaret might have to think, and maybe she would think about the calcium, or maybe she would think about the protein.
Or maybe you could tell me, oh yeah, it's got calcium and protein in it, and that's why it's good for you.
Yeah, exactly. So I could have provided that information.
So that feedback is really has to be in that moment based on what that child is telling you. So I see a feedback loop as including a scaffolding moment, or possibly providing information, or possibly encouraging, so that it doesn't stand by itself. It's all a part of quality of feedback.
Absolutely. And when I think about some of the really good feedback loops that I've seen, there's definitely, again, because I try to script things out when it gets catching my attention, and I'll be able to go back and say, oh yes, here is a hint. Here is
the question, right?
And she's providing information, and absolutely.
Yeah. So it's just because the indicators fall in a certain order doesn't necessarily mean that they stand apart.
Exactly.
They complement
Exactly.
each other.
Yeah, there's an integration.
Yep. So we're getting a little bit long-winded, so let's do language
Yes.
modeling,
Okay.
and then we'll come back with our other one. So language modeling, you want to talk a little bit about what that really means?
Sure. And so, as you know from the definition, language modeling is about really encouraging the children's use of language, and it's what the teacher's doing to stimulate and facilitate their language. And again, the most common misperception I see is that teachers think that if they talk a lot, that they're doing good language modeling. And while we definitely, children need to hear good language models, there's no question
Right.
that children learn language when they hear it, but they also learn language when they use it.
Right.
And so that frequent conversation is a really critical piece of it. Teacher who talks and doesn't pause to give children time to answer, or who answers her own question, is really impinging on children.
Limiting their opportunity for exchange.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think that that's a big piece. I also see teachers ask open-ended questions, but once again, they answer them themselves, or they maybe even move on before the child has a chance to process.
Or their answer's not contingent.
Right. And so that's another place where, yes, there's teacher talk, but it's really not. And again, I would count it as an observer. I would note it on my note sheet, but it wouldn't be the most effective.
The depth, yeah.
So the depth piece is missing.
I call it interview versus conversation.
Oh, yeah.
And
Yeah.
you can have a lot of interview questions, but it's not an actual conversation. So just quickly back to the footnote, because I think we skipped that. Quality of feedback. I think it's important on the bottom of page 69 that it's in response to something a child says or does.
Right.
But a teacher could start that conversation.
Absolutely.
So we're just looking at the message from the child about their understanding of something,
Right.
and how does that teacher take that moment and expand the child's understanding.
Right. So teacher is reading a book to the children, and she stops right at the really interesting point, and she goes, "What do you think's going to happen next?" Teacher set the stage, right?
Right.
Child responds. If the child responds and the teacher says, why do you think that? Tell me more. Then that moves us into quality of feedback.
Right, exactly.
And so it doesn't always have to be child initiated, and that is a misconception that I run into from time to time.
Yeah. And I think the big part with language modeling, again, is really focusing on conversation and how open-ended questions, repeating what somebody says, describing what's going on, or introducing language that's a little more complex in the context of the conversation is really what builds children's language skills.
Yeah.
So we're going to sign off for now, and we'll be back to talk about our example in a real-life situation.
All right. Thanks, everybody.